A river runs through the heart of Rochester, New York. The mighty Genesee helped build this industrial city, where corporate giants Kodak and Xerox established their headquarters. But the river is also where a notorious serial killer dumped the bodies of most of his victims, one by one. He became known as the Genesee River Killer.
Once you kill somebody, killing somebody else is a snap of a finger.
His name is Arthur Shawcross. Over a 2-year period, he instilled fear throughout the city as he murdered at least 11 women.
I was convicted of 11, suspected of 19 more, and, I'm not going no farther.
He preyed mostly on prostitutes, strangling and suffocating them with his bare hands.
They weren't kicking at all. You hit the pressure point, you don't move.
He mutilated some of the bodies and even claimed to have eaten their flesh.
I don't know why I did it. It was just something that happened in the spur of the moment. That was it.
As the body count grew, the Rochester Police Department formed a task force that would become the largest in the city's history.
We had a conference room, which we called the War Room. Photographs of the deceased were put on the wall. Any information that was gathered was put on the wall.
The task force worked around the clock.
Long hours, wintertime, freezing, 18-hour days. It was rough for a year and a half.
The entire city of Rochester was unnerved.
There was an ominous cloud that kind of hung over the community. Certainly it's true it hung over law enforcement.
From top to bottom, everybody was concerned about getting this guy.
It all began on March 23, 1988, when a hunter stumbled upon a body in Salmon Creek and called police. The victim was identified as 27-year-old Dorothy Blackburn, a known prostitute. An autopsy revealed that she had been strangled.
Dorothy was a tough street hooker, and if somebody tried to hurt her, she would fight. She wouldn't take any garbage.
The city was hit hard by the crack epidemic, and certain areas like Lyle Avenue were flooded with prostitutes working for quick drug money.
So many girls were out, it was like a joke. Loaded with prostitutes, loaded with hookers, absolutely. Up and down the street, 24/7.
Dorothy worked on Lyle Avenue, and to police, her murder seemed like a routine homicide.
It's a dangerous occupation. It could be a John that didn't want to pay. It could be her pimp. So at that time, we had no idea.
7 months later, a man was rummaging through debris in the woods down by the Genesee River Gorge when he saw what he thought were the skeletal remains of a deer. Then he saw clothing nearby and called police. The body was so badly decomposed, it could not be recognized.
We had to recreate her face, had the skeleton recreated into an actual face.
After seeing the recreation in the newspaper, her father identified the woman as 28-year-old Anna Steffen, a prostitute from Lyle Avenue. The medical examiner ruled the cause of death as probable asphyxiation. Still, police didn't think the two murders were connected.
In any urban area where prostitution occurs, there may be violence involving prostitutes. So I think initially there wasn't a real alarm.
Almost a year passed before police were called to the river once again. This time, it was the body of Patty Ives, a Lyle Avenue prostitute found on October 27, 1989.
There were 3 prostitutes that we knew were prostitutes on Lyle Avenue, and they were hidden. And it's not like, somebody drags a prostitute in the alley and stabs her and leaves her lay. Somebody took the time to hide these bodies. And that's when I thought that we had a serial killer in Rochester.
The police put Lyle Avenue under 24-hour surveillance and warned the women there to be on guard.
We were telling them to be careful, work in pairs. If you're going to work the streets, work with somebody you know, don't be alone, and be very cautious.
But it was business as usual for the elusive serial killer. Despite the massive police presence, the killings became more frequent.
It was very frustrating. I mean, we had the area scoured with our tactical unit, undercover police officers, and apparently he was picking up girls right under our noses.
On a cold Thanksgiving day in 1989, police responded to another body found near the Genesee River.
It was a deserted area. Her body was found under carpeting by a young man walking his dog. And at that point, there was just this feeling of helplessness because it seemed that no one was going to stop the individual who was killing these women.
The victim was 29-year-old June Stott.
Can you tell us something about her physical condition? Describe how the body was?
No, we can't, because that's all investigative information.
What police wouldn't say was that June Stott's body was unlike the others.
June Stott was entirely different. She'd been subjected to a post-mortem mutilation, a very deep wound from the top of the chest down to the vaginal area, and had been eviscerated to a certain degree.
It seemed the killer was growing bolder and more disturbed with each victim. The FBI was called in to help create a profile of the suspect.
One of the first things we did is go out and take a look at the area, the crime scenes, where the bodies were dumped, get a look at the River Gorge area.
They felt that the location of the dump sites was a clue to the killer's identity.
People choose dump sites because they're comfortable or familiar with the area, probably a fisherman or familiar with that gorge area for reasons besides the homicide itself.
The victims were also most likely familiar with their killer.
How is he getting these victims? These women are terrified on the street. And the answer we felt was that he was a regular customer and that they knew him, and therefore they weren't afraid to get into a car.
The FBI believed the offender was most likely a white male with a history of violent crime who held a menial job and was probably married or had a girlfriend. He was likely a known John in the area and also a hunter or fisherman. But other than that, he would appear nondescript.
We felt that he was extraordinarily ordinary, that the victims and maybe even the investigators were looking right through him.
McCrary also suspected that the mutilation of June Stott after she was killed was a sign of things to come.
We might see this sort of behavior again. Maybe we could catch the guy coming back to the scene.
Even with the profile, the police weren't able to stop the killer from plucking women off the street. In a single month, December 1989, 4 more women were reported missing. One of them was Darlene Trippi.
She didn't come home for Christmas, and it was her favorite holiday. So I kind of knew then and there that she wasn't with us anymore.
Police began using a helicopter to try and find the bodies of the missing girls. On January 3rd, 1990, a state police helicopter spotted one and circled around.
And as they got closer, they saw that a gray Chevy was parked directly over the body on the side of the road.
The helicopter radioed for ground support and followed the car as it drove several miles to the Wedgwood nursing home, where the driver parked and went inside. When police arrived, they asked the man who was driving the car to come outside and talk.
Is this a coincidence that he happened to stop on this road directly over the body, just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time?
They weren't sure if the mysterious man was connected in any way to the murders in Rochester, but they had plenty of questions, and a suspect more than willing to talk.
I didn't have to tell them nothing. You know, they asked a question, I answered.
On January 3rd, 1990, police began questioning 44-year-old Arthur Shawcross outside the Wedgwood nursing home in Spencerport, New York. They wanted to know why a helicopter had just spotted him near a dead body.
He wanted to know what was you doing parked on the side of the road, so I told him I just had to urinate.
Shawcross wasn't under arrest, but the investigators asked if he would go with them to the state police barracks.
I said, you know, we need to get out of here. You know, there's just a lot of people around. It's awfully embarrassing, and I don't want you to be embarrassed. Do you mind coming with me?
Shawcross agreed and even signed consent forms allowing police to search the car and his house.
He was as calm as he could be. He was as cooperative as he could be, and it was almost as if he wanted not to draw attention to himself and try to come off as a regular guy.
But when they ran the name Arthur Shawcross through the police computer, they discovered that he had killed in the past.
Put his name in. The very first thing that pops up is burglary, arson, manslaughter. Well, now we know. We got a player.
Without any evidence to charge him with a crime, the police tried to learn as much from him voluntarily as they could.
The whole purpose of this interview was to elicit information. Made it clear to him that he's free to leave. You know, we just need to talk.
Shawcross was more than happy to oblige.
And they talked to me for half the night and didn't arrest me or nothing.
The police took their time with Shawcross, asking about his childhood. He said he grew up in Brownville, New York, a small town near the Canadian border.
Never really had anything bad to say about his parents, or his family, or his upbringing.
After being drafted into the Army in 1967, he completed a tour of duty in Vietnam.
And I went from Saigon, I went up to Pleiku, Central Highlands in Vietnam, and I went from Pleiku, I transferred, went to the 1st of the 14th Infantry to Kon Tum, Vietnam.
Eventually, police asked him about the manslaughter charge. Shawcross hesitated, but then admitted that he had killed a young boy and girl in 1972. He had served 15 years in prison and was paroled to Rochester in 1987.
He attempted to portray himself as very sad for what he had done, and he knew that this was a real bad thing.
Shawcross also talked about his current life in Rochester. It turned out the car he was driving was owned by his mistress, Clara Neal, who worked at the Wedgwood nursing home. He was also married to a woman named Rose, his 4th wife, whom he had met while in prison.
I was writing to a couple of teenage girls, and they were writing, then they introduced me to their mother, and I started writing the mother, and then the mother came to visit.
Shawcross began living with Rose as soon as he was released from prison, and they eventually married. He was now working at night, chopping salads at a local food service company. But what really got the investigators' attention was when he talked about his favorite fishing spots.
He's telling us about Genesee River Gorge. Well, we've got a body there. He's talking about another place. Well, we've got a body there. He likes to fish here. We had a body there.
During the interview, the only time Shawcross became agitated was when they asked if he saw prostitutes.
He would slam his fist on the desk and get very angry, and he would just erupt. He said, I don't do prostitutes. I don't hang out with prostitutes. He said, I've never been with a prostitute.
After 8 hours of questioning, the police were forced to let him go.
I certainly didn't believe at that point there was what the law calls probable cause to arrest him.
They took his picture and dropped him off at his apartment late that evening. They had already searched it during the interrogation, and it was now under 24-hour surveillance. Overnight, detectives showed his picture around to prostitutes on Lyle Avenue. One girl picked him out immediately as being a regular of hers. She knew him as Mitch.
I bought a jacket. On the back of the coat, 2-inch letters on the back, it says Mitch. You know, guys, people call me Mitch. You know, I just waved to them.
The next day, 2 investigators approached Shawcross on the street and asked if he wouldn't mind answering more questions.
I really thought at that point he was going to lawyer up. And when he didn't, I was never more surprised and relieved. If he lawyers up, end game, we can arrest him. Maybe. What, can we make it stick? I don't know.
Shawcross got in their car and they drove to the place where the prostitute said she and Shawcross had sex.
I said, do you recall having sex with a prostitute at this location? He said, oh yeah, just once, I forgot.
Having caught Shawcross in a lie, the investigators headed to the Rochester Police Department to interrogate him further. On the way, they passed the area where Shawcross had picked up the prostitute who had ID'd him. They told Shawcross they knew more.
And I again informed him, this is where you picked up a prostitute, and she's cooperating with us, and that she also saw you with Elizabeth Gibson on the 11 hours before she was killed.
Elizabeth Gibson was a prostitute whose body was discovered just a few weeks earlier in the woods by a hunter. The detectives bore down on Shawcross.
Explain how you were seen with this girl, Elizabeth Gibson. 11 hours later, her body was found. We have paint chips at the scene. We have tire impressions. At that point, he was asked if anybody else was involved in this, namely his wife, Rose.
They started threatening my wife and started threatening Clara. Yeah, finally, I just gave up.
He puts his head down and he goes, she's not involved.
After only a half hour of questioning, Arthur Shawcross admitted killing Elizabeth Gibson.
He had strangled her, and he said the reason being is they were having sex and she scratched his eyes. And he got carried away and suffocated her, strangled her. He didn't mean to kill her, he said, but he was irate because she had scratched his eyes.
But it would take 4 more hours till Shawcross came completely clean. Police confronted him with a matching earring from another victim found in his car. Shawcross cracked.
I just get a big knot in my chest, and I said, yeah, think to myself, it's over with.
The cops gave Shawcross a stack of photographs of dead and missing women.
And he went through them like a deck of cards, and he'd sort them out and show us the ones that he was responsible for killing.
When it was over, there were 11 pictures in Shawcross's pile.
After I admitted to the 11, it was like a big weight fell off me.
Almost as shocking as the number of victims was Shawcross's lack of emotion.
He showed no remorse. I don't believe he had any conscience at all. Nothing. We asked him, could you give us a reason why you did this? And his reason was just taking care of business.
With the Genesee River killer finally off the street, the entire city of Rochester breathed a sigh of relief.
We left the room, and there were probably 40 police officers, commanders and officers, that had tears in their eyes. This was over.
But as more details about Arthur Shawcross were revealed, the relief would be replaced by rage.
I could not believe that they let him out after killing 2 kids. I was livid, and I still am very angry that all could have been prevented.
We are here today to formally announce the arrest.
On January 5th, 1990, officials in Rochester, New York, called a press conference to announce the arrest of the killer who had terrorized their city for 2 years.
This investigation has resulted in the arrest of Shawcross in 8 of the murders, and 3 additional murders will be presented to the Monroe and Wayne County grand juries.
There was satisfaction that all the hard police work had finally paid off.
They didn't see a Thanksgiving. They didn't see a Christmas. They didn't see their families for days on end, but they brought the killer to justice.
But there were hard questions as well. Shawcross had killed 2 children. Instead of being locked up for life, he was out walking the streets of Rochester 15 years later.
I get tears in my eyes when I think about it. How could a guy kill 2 children and still be walking free? It's obscene.
As his trial loomed ahead, his personal history was examined closely to ascertain his life story.
We were able to obtain his school records back from Watertown, his military records, his records from the correctional facilities in which he had been incarcerated. And to me, what it painted a picture of is somebody who was antisocial, somebody who was a violent individual.
I start sweating.
He also underwent a battery of psychiatric interviews to try and make some sense of his grisly crimes.
Just a funny feeling, and I strangled with one hand.
He told shocking stories of sexual abuse and cannibalism. But his accounts didn't always match up, and some questioned their validity.
Do guys like this lie? Absolutely.
Shawcross claims that starting at a young age, he was sexually abused by his mother and one of her friends.
Things happened in my house when I was 4, 7, 9, between my mother and who I thought was my aunt, was my mother's girlfriend, right?
He also claims he had sex with his sisters.
Me and Jeannie, we were 9 or 10, and I'd do things with Jeannie. I did it once with Donna, once with my cousin Sandra, and a couple of times with my cousin Linda.
He wrote to one of his psychiatrists to have engaged in sexual acts with a wide variety of not only people but animals.
But all of Shawcross's family members have vigorously denied the allegations.
He claimed to be abused by a wide variety of individuals. The only one's word for that was Arthur Shawcross.
The eldest of 4 children, Shawcross began showing signs of trouble during his childhood, evidence to defense psychiatrist Dorothy Lewis of abuse at home.
Throughout his childhood, there are allusions to his running away from home. The abuse at home would seem to have been so severe that he had good reason to run away.
He also stood out at school.
He was considered very peculiar by his teachers, and he would hide under the radiator or hide under the teacher's desk, and he couldn't relate to other children in a normal fashion.
He was constantly getting into fights and getting into trouble.
That's a hellraiser.
He got on the school bus with a lead pipe, and he threatened the other children there. This is not just being aggressive, this is really being violent.
Shawcross's first brush with the law came at age 18, when he was arrested for breaking into a department store. Not long after, he married his first wife.
I met my wife at the family bargain store where you get all your bargains.
They divorced 2 years later in 1967. That same year, he was drafted into the Army. He married again before leaving for Vietnam.
Vietnam is a beautiful country. There's a lot of resources in Vietnam, but man, there's a lot of hell over there.
His tour of duty would be a seminal period in his life.
The military taught you how to kill, didn't teach you how to stop.
It is in Vietnam where he says he first tasted human flesh.
Well, I took 2 heads off 2 female enemies, and I don't know why, but I took the left leg from the knees to the hip. And had a little fire, and I was cooking that leg.
He also says he was haunted by what he had seen and done during the war.
I had light nightmares all the time.
In the spring of 1969, Shawcross was honorably discharged.
I'm home 3 days. My mother says, "Aren't you going to go see your wife?" I asked Mom, "What wife? What are you talking about?" I'd forgot I was married.
Their marriage didn't last. His second wife divorced him after he was arrested again, this time for burglary and arson. Shawcross had set fire to a barn and 2 factories.
Those fires were set for another reason, and I can't talk about it. Other people were involved.
He was sent to Attica for 5 years, but was released on parole in 1971 after serving only half his sentence.
When you first get in prison, you can learn about every crime there is, how to do anything you want.
After his release, he married again and moved to Watertown, New York, a few miles from his hometown. Then, just 6 months later, a 10-year-old boy, Jack Blake, went missing in Watertown. 4 months later, an 8-year-old girl, Karen Ann Hill, also went missing. Her body was discovered under a bridge. Someone had raped and suffocated her by stuffing her mouth with leaves and dirt. A police dog led authorities from the bridge to the home of 27-year-old Arthur Shawcross. He was arrested.
I just had a lawyer. He said, "Keep your mouth shut, let me handle it." And he did.
In a plea agreement, he admitted to killing both children, but he wasn't charged with murder. Instead, he was allowed to plead guilty to 1 count of manslaughter for killing Karen Ann Hill. He was not charged with rape, and he was not charged for the murder of Jack Blake. He was sentenced to an indeterminate term of up to 25 years.
It certainly raises questions that if he had been held responsible for the murder and received the maximum sentence then of 25 to life, he would have never been out on the streets to be able to commit the crimes in Rochester.
Today, Shawcross refuses to even talk about the 2 murders.
I just don't want to bring up those memories. It's too painful, there's a lot of shame, and I regret it badly.
But after serving 14.5 years for killing a child, he would be released and soon start killing again. On April 29, 1987, Arthur Shawcross was released on parole from prison after serving 14.5 years for killing 8-year-old Karen Ann Hill.
As I walked out the front door, you know, it was like a different universe. The door closed behind you. You don't turn around and look back.
The parole board sent him to Binghamton, New York, and informed the police department that a child killer was moving into their community.
A very well-liked and very well-known police officer from the Binghamton Police Department. His very own daughter, she was murdered by a pedophile.
The officer complained about Shawcross, and the parole board moved him. But no matter where he went, Shawcross couldn't escape his past. Word had spread, and he was literally chased from town to town.
Some drunks show up in my apartment. You know, they're going to kick my butt.
Frustrated, the parole board finally settled him in Rochester. Only this time they decided not to tell the local police.
Law enforcement wasn't notified specifically of his presence here. I guess you could say that the communication wasn't as good as it was. I think a lot was learned from the Shawcross case.
Shawcross eventually married his fourth wife, Rose, a pen pal he had corresponded with while in prison. He also started seeing Clara Neal, a woman he met at his job chopping vegetables. He had hopes of making a fresh start with his life, but it didn't last.
I'm trying to better myself, you know. I had the feeling it was going to work, right? But you meet a prostitute on the street, and it's like a kid in a candy store.
Shawcross claims he never sought out a prostitute before moving to Rochester. But one day, while driving his girlfriend's car, he encountered one.
The girl comes up to me, right? I'm parked, I'm at a street light, and I got the windows down. And he leans in and says, "You want to go on a date?" She had explained it to me, right? You know, so we went and did whatever she wanted to do, you know, and went from there.
Soon he was seeing prostitutes regularly. Then, in February 1988, he picked up Dorothy Blackburn. He says she bit him during oral sex.
She gets down and she bit me, and I smacked her. And when I bit her, I said they were even. You know, she starts fighting and everything, and I just strangled a bit.
Shawcross coldly dumped her body in a creek near the car and went home.
I was in a fog. When I got home, Rose didn't know me, didn't know who I was. My neighbors would say the same thing. I was in a daze for a few days.
Dorothy Blackburn's body was found within a week, but there was nothing to connect Shawcross to the murder. He kept his dark secret to himself and resumed his routine life.
Things like that, where I did something wrong, I'd put it on a shelf and close the door and forget about it.
But he continued to frequent prostitutes. A few months later, he met Anna Steffen on the street.
Yeah, I didn't have a car with Anna. I was walking up Lake Avenue, and this girl comes up, you know, right out of the blue, tell me what she wanted, you know, and I said, okay, let's go.
They went into the woods down by the gorge to have sex.
And when she got her clothes off, they strangled her right there.
Her skeletal remains were found about 2 months later in a pile of debris next to the river.
He was careful to isolate his victims, carefully to secrete their bodies. That perhaps contributed to him being able to remain out as long as he did.
After murdering Anna Steffen, Shawcross didn't kill again for almost a year.
You know, I wasn't seeing too many prostitutes on that side of the river.
But old habits died hard. Shawcross resumed his killing spree in June 1989. 59-year-old Dorothy Keeler was a homeless woman he had befriended several months earlier.
I got no place to live, you know, it was near wintertime. I said, well, I'll tell you what. And he said, you clean my apartment for me and my old lady. And I said, I'll give you $4 an hour and you can live there.
But Shawcross says when she started to steal from him, things got ugly.
One day we went down to Tennessee River, and we were talking about it. And we got mad, and I just picked up a log that was sitting there and whacked her. And she went down like a cold stolen steer.
He was just as comfortable killing people he knew as he was in killing strangers, and he had no guilt, no remorse, no empathy about any of that, and those are the hallmarks of a violent psychopath.
Soon Shawcross was killing more frequently, even as the task force set up to catch him swelled to nearly 100 officers and detectives.
This is exciting for him. It's proving that he's smarter than the rest of us. It's very intoxicating, and they like it, and they just escalate and go at it more and more frequently.
Before 1989 came to a close, he would take the lives of 8 more women.
Well, I was finishing up, and I was just looking for the rest of them.
By November 1989, Arthur Shawcross had killed 4 women in Rochester, New York, in just under 2 years.
The only thing I can figure, once you kill, it's easier than on. You know, you don't forget it.
Over the next 2 months, he took the lives of 7 more.
I'm finding them quicker. You know, it's on my mind, you know.
Almost all his victims were prostitutes from Lyle Avenue.
I mean, what do prostitutes represent? Well, there's sex. And so the guy, by killing prostitutes, clearly he's indicating he has a real dilemma in this area, a real problem, serious problem with this.
The Street of Sin had become Shawcross's hunting ground.
I just figured I'm going back in that area and get the rest of them.
The police set up a dragnet to try and catch the brazen killer.
They had undercover details among the prostitutes. They interviewed the prostitutes. They issued cautions to the prostitutes. But as the bodies kept turning up, there was this feeling of helplessness on whatever we seem to do is not leading to a positive result.
The task force checked to see if any violent felons had been released to the Rochester area, but Shawcross's name never surfaced.
He was brought into Rochester more or less secretly. Nobody was, nobody was notified.
Shawcross knew the cops were actively searching for the killer, but that didn't stop his rampage or even slow him down.
When you're doing things like that, you don't think about it. It's just instant. I think after a while it became a game.
He evaded capture for 2 years.
I think while Arthur Shawcross was not book smart, I think he was very street savvy. Shawcross was known to frequent Dunkin' Donuts where police officers assembled, maybe keeping his ear to the ground.
So we're sitting there conversing, and he's pointing out all the decoys.
The women were aware they were being targeted and had their guard up. But Shawcross was a repeat customer and fooled them into thinking he was a safe date.
And then picking up the girls I took out before, so they know who I am.
Shawcross even told his wife and others to watch out for the killer.
I was in that role like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. I was telling Rose I should be careful where you're going. My neighbors, I'd escort them downtown.
As Shawcross's killing spree continued, it also became more gruesome. His 6th victim, June Stott, found on Thanksgiving Day, had been mutilated.
I took the body, I split it open. Right? I don't know what I was thinking.
She was cut from the base of her sternum to her pubic area, and obviously it seemed that the level of violence was increasing.
What we're seeing is really the underlying pathology of the offender coming out. These are definitely sexually violent crimes, and I think that the mutilation of the vaginal area of June Stott is just another manifestation of that, another focus on that underlying problem.
Soon, 2 more women were reported missing, 22-year-old Maria Welch and 32-year-old Darlene Trippi.
Every time the phone rang, my heart would go to my feet. And I would be hoping it was her,
Their bodies weren't found until Shawcross led police to the dump sites after his arrest.
And it was very difficult, because I'm the older sister, and I just couldn't take care of her. I couldn't help her then.
His 10th victim, June Cicero, was reported missing just a few days before Christmas. It was her body the police helicopter spotted, with Shawcross parked nearby on January 3rd, 1990. June had also been mutilated post-mortem.
He'd come back and cut the vagina of June Cicero.
The next day, before Shawcross had confessed, police found his final victim, Felicia Stevens, whom Shawcross says he strangled with the power window of his car.
Stick her head in the door, and I got a button by the door, and I just pulled the button up and drove away, and she's still there.
That same day, January 4th, 1990, Shawcross confessed to 11 murders. He led police to the bodies of Maria Welch and Darlene Trippi, the last 2 women reported missing by their families.
She was a wonderful girl. She loved children. She was just a joy to have around you. She lit up any room she went into.
The relatives of many of his victims would become fixtures at Shawcross's trial. The testimony was almost as shocking as his crimes, with appalling stories of necrophilia, cannibalism, and a startling video of Shawcross under hypnosis.
No.
When Arthur Shawcross first went on trial, he faced a maximum sentence of 250 years in prison.
It's just too bad back then they didn't have a death penalty, because that'd be ideal to put him in the electric chair and fry him. No question in my mind.
On the advice of his lawyers, Shawcross pled not guilty by reason of insanity, in an attempt to get sentenced to a mental institution instead of prison.
To prove that you're insane under New York law, you have to show either that you didn't know and appreciate the consequences of your actions, or if you can show that you didn't know what you were doing was wrong.
When opening arguments began in October 1990, 10 months after his arrest, the prosecution depicted Shawcross as a calculating killer who was fully aware that what he was doing was wrong.
Why do you dump the bodies in an area where they're not likely to be found? That all to me speaks to somebody who knows what you're doing, knows it's wrong, and is trying to cover up your tracks.
The prosecution also portrayed him as an evil, sexually violent psychopath who had no remorse for his crimes.
He loved killing. He loved the thrill of finding a girl, the thrill of getting her naked, the thrill of having sex with them, and the thrill of watching them die as he's having sex with them. That was his fantasy, and that's what he enjoyed.
The defense argued that Shawcross didn't know what he was doing and was unable to control himself when he killed because he suffered from a psychiatric condition called dissociative disorder.
We all, to a greater or lesser extent, dissociate, get wrapped up in our own thoughts, miss the exit on a highway. He did have these episodes that could be triggered by emotional things, and when this occurred, whoever was there would be the victim. This was a severely disturbed individual.
The defense hired psychiatrist Dorothy Ortnow Lewis to evaluate Shawcross and testify.
The time that these acts were committed, he was absolutely incapable of either appreciating the nature of the acts or the consequences.
She argued that his violent dissociative states were caused by a toxic mix of brain lesions, sexual abuse as a child, and post-traumatic stress disorder caused by Vietnam.
When you bring together an individual who does have brain damage and dysfunction, and you raise that child in a violent, abusive, threatening household, then you really have a time bomb that you've created.
Shawcross never took the stand, but the defense played videotapes of him, supposedly hypnotized by Dr. Lewis, reliving sexual abuse by his mother.
She put a stick in there.
She put a stick in there?
Broomstick.
She put a broomstick where? She put a broomstick where, Artie?
My butt.
The defense countered with psychiatrist Park Dietz, who testified that Shawcross was faking and lying about the abuse.
There's no evidence that Mr. Shawcross endured anything that might be called sexual torture at the hands of his mother.
The striking pictures of Shawcross, purportedly under hypnosis, were combined with testimony that he was a cannibal.
In a couple of the cases, he cut out the genitalia and ate them. Now, this is very, very similar to what he said he did in Vietnam with eating parts of one of the women that he captured.
Again, the prosecution contended that Shawcross was making the stories up to try to appear insane.
If you want to show people you're nuts, what more to say than you ate bodies? I think the only one who can ever answer that truly is Arthur Shawcross.
Throughout the 4-month trial, relatives of Shawcross's victims filled the courthouse, including the mother of Karen Ann Hill, the 8-year-old girl Shawcross had killed in 1972.
Can't tell you the feeling that come over me, just seeing him again. It wasn't easy. It wasn't easy. I wanted to say, why? Why did you take my heart?
Shawcross's wife Rose and girlfriend Clara Neal also attended the trial and stood by their man the entire time.
He's not a monster. He is a loving human. Please believe me.
The jury deliberated for 6 hours over 2 days before delivering the verdict.
Members of the jury, how do you find in the matter of the people of the state of New York versus Arthur Shawcross?
Guilty.
Shawcross was found guilty on all 10 counts of murder, but it was little consolation for all the families who had lost a loved one.
I think about Darlene every day. She was a person, alive, had a lot going for her, and he took it all away.
Shawcross was sentenced to the maximum, 250 years in prison.
All of us wish to understand what it is that happened. Do you have anything you'd like to say?
No comment at this time.
A few months later, he pled guilty to the murder of Elizabeth Gibson in neighboring Wayne County.
If there is a hell, he should be at the lowest, on the lowest rung. I don't think he has one shred of remorse for the pain, agony, and suffering that he caused the victims and their families.
Today, Shawcross is incarcerated at the Sullivan Correctional Facility in New York's Catskill Mountains. He has nothing but time to contemplate his heinous crimes.
I feel sorry for a lot of things, and I don't feel sorry for some things.
He has told different stories over the years and now claims he started killing prostitutes as revenge because he thought one of them had given him AIDS.
I had this one woman, she tells me, she's one of the girls you took out in this area is HIV positive. And that ate at me. Then I started going back and knocking down just those I took out in that area.
He acknowledges that he used to have trouble controlling his rage.
Anger will jump out, you know. I can control it now. I couldn't control it back then. When I first got here, you know, I was angry all the time, but over the years I mellowed out.
But Shawcross also says that if given the chance, he might kill again.
Nobody knows what will happen tomorrow until it gets here. Tomorrow never shows up. You can learn from your past. You can't learn from what's going on in the future. Nobody knows it.
Clara Harris did kill her husband, but to what degree is she responsible?
Why are kids killing at such an alarming rate?
Year after year, raising the bar on criminal justice programs. American Justice, next, only on A&E.